I'm going to start the series by answering the question, what is a not-for-profit? There's a lot of confusion about what a not-for-profit is and what it does, and this can be really confusing if you're trying to research how to start one. In this video I'm going to clearly define what a not-for-profit organisation is, what it isn't, and what it's set up to do. By definition, a not-for-profit organisation is a business that aims to do something other than make a profit for its owners. It's independent, meaning it's not owned by the government or any other statutory services. It also means it's not owned by shareholders. However, one of the most common misperceptions I hear is that if you run a not-for-profit organisation, you can't make a profit. That's not actually what not-for-profit means. It doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't make a profit. Instead, it's a way of doing business that dictates what you do with that profit. One of the biggest reasons that I see not-for-profit organisations failing or not making it past the first year is that the founders believe that they shouldn't make a profit, and instead they aim to break even because that feels like a more ethical way to do business. But that's just not viable, and it's definitely not sustainable. Let me put it a different way. A not-for-profit organisation is a business. A charity is a business. A social enterprise is a business. And the first rule of business is you bring in more income than you spend. More money comes in than goes out. The majority of people who start a not-for-profit do so either to raise awareness of an issue that they feel strongly about, to fix a problem in their community, or to do something positive and meaningful in the world. These are all good and valid reasons, but unless they're paired with some sort of business knowledge, it's difficult to gain any traction and make any real impact. So let's be clear, if you're starting or running a not-for-profit organisation, you are supposed to make a profit, but you've committed to using that profit to sustain and build on the impactful work that you do. You can charge for services, you can pay your staff, you can buy a building. Then, after that, any profit is reinvested back into your organisation. Back into the work that you set the organisation up to deliver, back into your community. It's used for delivering more, helping more people, creating a bigger impact. The next thing to note is that the term not-for-profit is not a legal business structure in itself. So if you're looking at setting one up, there are 3 core questions to ask to help you decide which not-for-profit structure is right for you. The first question to ask is, how will your organisation be funded? There are 2 main ways to bring income into a not-for-profit organisation. The first is grants and donations, and the second is through sales, which can be either products or services. If you're sure you want to focus on one or the other, then that makes deciding on a legal structure a little bit easier. But if you want the flexibility to do both, then there are options for that as well. The second question to consider is, will your organisation have voting members? Members are involved in the running of the organisation, and they vote on how this is done. They might vote on who gets elected as a director, a trustee, or onto the management committee, or they might have more of a say in the day-to-day running of the organisation. A group of members could be made up from people who benefit from what your organisation does, so they're known as service users. There could be those people who founded and invested in starting up the organisation. There could be your customers, or there could be anyone else with a vested interest in what you're doing in the community. It's important to understand, however, that if you have members, you're accountable to them, and they can vote to change the people who are in control of the organisation. Your decision as to whether you want or need members within your organisation will also inform the type of organisation that you set up. And finally, you'll need to consider whether you want to be incorporated or unincorporated. The main difference between an incorporated and an unincorporated organisation is how it's seen as a legal entity. This is somewhat similar to the difference between being a sole trader and a registered business. An unincorporated organisation is seen in legal terms as a collection of individuals, meaning that the people who set up the group are themselves the group. Therefore, any financial obligations, debts, claims or errors are the direct responsibility of that group of individuals. But to be clear, if you set up an unincorporated organisation, it's unlikely, for example, that you'd own premises or employ staff. So the risk is very low at the beginning. And if those obligations did become too risky for that group of individuals to continue to take on, then you can always switch to an incorporated organisation later down the line. So in contrast, an incorporated organisation is a legal entity that's separate from the people who set it up. In other words, it exists in its own right. It's formally registered as an organisation, meaning that it can buy property, employ staff and enter into contracts. And as such, those debts, claims or other financial obligations belong to the organisation rather than to the individuals who run it. This gives its trustees, directors or management committee some protection from the risk. But of course that doesn't mean that they're not still responsible for the overall professional management of that organisation. When deciding whether incorporated or unincorporated is the right choice for you, it's worth noting that, as you might imagine, incorporated organisations are more closely regulated. They're expected to adhere to rules and policy. They can take a bit longer to set up, involve a bit more paperwork, and usually require additional expertise such as accountants and solicitors. This is all in order to satisfy the governance requirements of setting up a not-for-profit as its own legal entity. So if possible, think long term. Would you prefer to start a small unincorporated organisation with just a small group of individuals, and then if and when you outgrow that structure, incorporate in order to mitigate any unnecessary risk and become more established? Or would you prefer to get all the paperwork done at the beginning and start as you mean to go on? These are all things to think about, but don't let them be a reason to not get started at all. Remember that you can start out with a really simple structure just to get going and then formalise it as you grow. And in the next video, I'll run through some of the most common legal structures of not-for-profit organisations so you can start to identify which one is right for you.